Hi, everybody. My name is Lance Sussman, and I'm going to be your instructor for Gratz College History Class 30521A, which is, of course, an online course, and our topic will be, quote, Before Hitler, the Jews of Western Europe in Modern Times. Before we begin, I want everyone to know, although I have been teaching college and university courses for about 35 years at this point, since I was a grad student myself. This is my first online class, and it is the first time I'm recording lectures on video like this. So along the way, if I do happen to stumble or seem a little bit klutzy at this work, please understand, and I beg forgiveness from you. Now, today I'm talking to you from Gratz College in Elkins Park. It's a classroom, and as you can see, there's a wonderful picture behind me. Hereafter, it will either be from my own office at the synagogue. I'm about a mile up the street, or from my home where I do have an office as well, so there'll be different backgrounds. I also hope that I'll be sharing pictures and images and other things with you along the way. For me, this is a particularly exciting class. I have studied German Jewish history and British Jewish history on the own. My actual expertise is American Jewish history, but in the last year or so, I've concentrated my readings on French Jewish history, so it's helping put the whole picture together. This class that we're in together now is kind of combined in many ways with Professor Michael Steinlauf's class on East European Jewish history before Hitler. So we're going to look from Berlin west, and I guess he'll look from the Polish border east, and between the two of us, we should have a rather complete picture of the European Jewish experience prior to the Holocaust. For those who are in the Holocaust program, I believe that will be most valuable, so that there'll be an understanding of the internal dynamics of the Jewish community and a better appreciation of how much was lost. Of course, the loss of people is the most tragic, but there was a loss of other things of culture and institutions and traditions as well. So we're going to learn about West European Jewry and its different dimensions, its achievements, its problems, its dynamics. It is a long and complex story that we're going to unpack together. Now, this being the opening session, I think obviously it is necessary to talk for just a moment about our syllabus. Hopefully you have it. If you do need to communicate, my email should be available to you, and I encourage regular contact both with me as well as in the forums for this class. The syllabus gives a description of the scope of the class. After today's quick review of all of Jewish history, don't nod off because you'll miss several centuries if you do so. We pick up the story in detail in 1492, and right away when we say 1492, you should be saying Columbus and the Spanish expulsion, right down to about 1939 and the Holocaust itself. There are several required texts for this class. The first is a textbook. It is multi-authored. It is the newest, most up-to-date textbook on world Jewish history, multi-edited. I'll give you the name John Ephron, and the book is called The Jews, a History, and it's out on Prentice Hall. It is a regular textbook, not unlike textbooks you've seen in American history. The second book is a reader of primary documents. A primary document is a kind of literary report, historical report, journalistic report that's in play in life, and it's the stuff which historians analyze, among other sources, to write a narrative, what we call history. And that kind of history is considered to be, quote, secondary literature. So the purpose of the reader, The Jews in the Modern World, edited by Mendes, Fleur, and Reinhartz, is to give you the opportunity to read documents, words, as they appeared in life during the course of history. Very often this is much more difficult reading than secondary narrative because it needs to be unpacked, and often there are many assumptions about time and place, language, and things of that nature. A third book is Hannah Arendt's study of Rachel Varnhagen, who was a Jewish woman in Germany at the edge of modernity in that country. It's not a particularly happy story, but it does illustrate the perils of modernity in terms of a rapid loss of Jewish identity, even self-hatred, and we need to take a look at that because it is part of the story. At the same time, I don't want to give any credence to a kind of anti-German feeling even within the Jewish community. That is a certain feeling and attitude in the community about German Jews being responsible for their own destiny, as if any sin that somebody might have committed would have justified massive genocidal death sentences like what happened in Germany. We're reading about Varnhagen because she's important in terms of certain transformations, but we shouldn't pick up any unwarranted attitudes, in my opinion. I've also listed, for your benefit, some recommended readings. A specialized book focusing on the Jews of Germany by an Israeli author, Amos Ilon. A wonderful survey of British Jewish history by Todd Endelman, who was the expert in that field. And Paula Hyman's book, unfortunately she passed away recently, had been at Yale for many years, her survey of the Jews of modern France. In addition to those three national narratives, I'm also suggesting you take a look at Evyatar Freisel's Atlas of Modern Jewish History. Everybody learns differently. I happen to be a visual kind of learner, and I find the use of maps to be particularly helpful. For example, Martin Gilbert has an Atlas of the Holocaust, which helps me understand at least the empirical part of that story. Some other resources that you should be familiar with is an online service that comes from Israel called Rambi, R-A-M-B-I. Rambi is a bibliographical search engine, and if you use it, it's not hard to use. It can be done in English. You can find articles on the whole run of Jewish history in journals very readily. So Rambi is an essential tool in general in Jewish studies. I've also listed several different academic journals, such as American Jewish History, the AJS Review, and others, to give you an idea of what current scholarship looks like. Very often scholars produce monographs and focus studies on a given topic before creating a full-scale book-length study. So these are the kind of building blocks of the field. They're also helpful in terms of style and how to create a citation and things of that nature. Grades, for better or worse, are important, and I have all the percentages listed there. These are These are equations that seem to be part of the culture of Gratz College. I always like to say I teach because I want to, but you have to pay me to grade. I really don't like grading, but I understand it's necessary, and you need not so much the grade as evaluation, and I'm glad to work with you on that. Basically, participation in the online forum will be 30%. There are 2 essays, each at 10%, a book review, 10%, a term paper, 20%, and an open final, which we'll talk about at 20%. As of now, we have 10 graduate students in the class. I'm told it might grow a little bit. I hope all 10 who are starting stay with us, and we have no undergraduates. So that doesn't mean we'll speak badly about them, but it's just we'll stick to our formula on the metrics of the class. The guidelines for participation in the online forum are stated. Basically, you need to hang in there and be part of the discussion to the best of your ability throughout the entire course. This is our classroom. This is how we exchange with one another. There's no room here for lurking, as they call it, online. So, hang in there. If you don't have an answer, certainly you have a question. And this is really about learning and sharing together. It's almost a modern, extended version of what took place and takes place in the yeshivot, in the Jewish seminaries, called chavruta. It's from the word chaver, which means friend. This is studying with friends. This is dialogical study. This is study not just what's in your own mind, but the shared experience with others. And of course, that is wonderful, and it's something that is characteristic of Jewish culture, and now through online technology, I believe is becoming mainline in Western education as well. A little bit on writing requirements. I know there's often anxiety on these things, but I will be glad to work with you. I view part of my work as anxiety reduction. There'll be an essay up to the year 1880, 4 pages minimum. And what I mean by 4 pages is 4 type pages, double-spaced, and normal font. 12 points would be fine. Please don't write 4 pages each and 72 points. They'll get 1 letter on each page, and it won't be much of an argument. A second essay after 1880, same length, a book review of 4 pages, a research prospectus, which when we get closer to it, I will talk to you about 2 pages, and that is ungraded. That is merely an organizing device. Your term paper, which should have a 10-page narrative to it, and then documentation, and then finally an open book, open note final. So I hope everybody is ready to study and to learn together. We have a fascinating, important, but admittedly complicated subject to look at together. Because of the nature of what we're looking at, there are numerous languages involved in this particular course. And I will say to you what my doctoral advisor said to me many years ago. He said, in your case, Lance, I just want you to learn English. So if you don't know Hebrew or Yiddish or French or German, lo lidog, they say in Hebrew, don't worry about it. Our discussion will be in English, and where non-English terms are used, we'll try to make sure that we are defining our terms. And since we're mostly online, in type form, not video, as this presentation is, pronunciation won't count at all, so everybody is lucky. Now, when we get to the essays, one other statement in that area. Part of the job of doing history is defining the topic. So you don't want to write a paper, French Jewish history to 1880. It's too big. On the other hand, you don't want to write a paper on Tuesday in the French Revolution. It's too small. So through discussion, this will be part of the forum, We'll figure out the scope of your writing assignments, and in fact, preparing together for the private individualized writing assignment, I believe will be a significant part of the general learning process. So, with all that in mind, I want to offer the prompt now for some discussion, and then just talk a little bit about Jewish history before the modern period. In terms of getting ready for this class, and just thinking about what is it that we mean when we talk about the West European Jewish experience before Hitler, I would ask you to kind of dig deep into yourself and think about your own family's history and culture. I happen to come from what might be considered in my generation a mixed family. My father's family came from Minsk, which is White Russia, and Lithuania, near the city of Kovno, and they had the East European Jewish experience. On the other hand, my mother herself was born in Germany, in a city called Bamberg, and we remain in touch with the Jewish community and others in Bamberg. And her family had arrived in southern Germany sometime in the 18th century, following a very long journey, which apparently began in Spain, went to Italy, and then eventually crossed the Alps and into Germany, where they lived for nearly 300 years before being compelled to flee to America and South America and Israel and other places to save their lives. We all have different family narratives. Some of us are of Jewish background, some of us are other backgrounds, some of us have mixed backgrounds. But what I would like you to think about and reflect on as best you can is what is the immigrant heritage that is combined in you? What are the different strands of immigration in your family history? Then, if possible, if the facts fit, think about any West European components of that, and how that transfers into your experience, whether it's here in America. I believe we might have one student from Australia. What is it when we talk about West European or even Western civilization, Western culture? What are the elements of that? What is it made up of? On the other hand, if the family is mostly of East European, what differentiates from the point of view that where you stand today, before we really get into this class, what's the difference between West European culture and East European Jewish culture? Are there really differences? Are there differences in the general culture? And are there differences in the Jewish culture? To what extent do the differences in the general culture mirror the differences in the internal Jewish culture? So what I want to do is just to find out how we connect to the long story of the rise of Western Europe, which we're going to define as from Germany to the west. It'll be Germany, France, Belgium, Holland, England, France, Italy, and to some extent Spain and Portugal. And what that looks like is a total configuration before the year 1492. And some discussion hopefully will follow. If you will please report a little family biographical information, family history. We can exchange with one another and see what themes begin to emerge. Now, finally, for today, knowing this is the first session, and I think my plan will be to do many of these initial talks by talking and then follow up with some written materials. I want to think about the long run of Jewish history, but to do so very quickly, no more than 10 minutes or so. Begin with the question of how the nations form. And if you think about English identity, for example, England as a unit, we realize that there is an Anglo portion, there's a Saxon portion, there's a Norman portion, that they were preceded by Celts, that Danish Vikings were once in the picture, that people from the mainland in France, Normans came and invaded and ultimately combined, so that English identity today alone, even before you get to the whole UK, is an amalgam of many different identities. The same is true in France. Brittany has a very specific culture. The culture of Alsace-Lorraine on the German border is heavily influenced by German culture. The area around Nice, which I highly recommend, by the way, I was just there, was for a long time Italian. The areas near Spain have Spanish influences. And it all comes together and creates a kind of French culture. One area in particular, Paris, will dominate. In England, Anglia will dominate. The Germans are even more complex, as many different groups, whether they were Goth or Visigoth or Vandals, come together, and they struggle to become a nation. Today, we talk about, let's take a group like Iranians who are so much in the news. In fact, there were Medes and Persians and many different groups that come together. The same was probably true with the origin of the Jews. Certainly it's the case here in the United States in a very radical form of way, with different groups coming together. The biblical story suggests that the Jews originally were from Mesopotamia and resettled in Canaan. It would seem to me linguistic evidence would suggest that the Jews were probably from Canaan itself, which becomes the land of Israel, and they amalgamate with many different people. For instance, a Philistine tribe, Dan, assimilates into Israelite culture and becomes the tribe of Dan, although they probably had Philistine origins. There were some groups that were outright Canaanites, maybe differentiated by class, it's not clear, who become part of a federated identity called Israel. Maybe some elements did come from Mesopotamia, or maybe the Levites came from Egypt. There are many different theories. So this early identity, today the linear text of the Bible would say these were the Hebrews, exists up to about the year 1000 BCE. We don't have the time, this is not the place to talk about all the intricacies of early biblical history. But according to a kind of a consensus that it's still debated, somewhere around the year 1000 BCE, a new identity, a new national identity emerges of the different tribes, which might mean different backgrounds, to form a federated kingdom known as Israel, the same way as here in the United States. You have different colonies that become different states that ultimately are united into one government, although the strains of states' rights actually continue, maybe even exacerbated in our own day. So ancient Israel was made up of different groups. They come together under the flag of an Israelite monarchy in Jerusalem, and that united kingdom is actually very short-lived. It's only for 2 generations. So already by 922, the kingdom splits and 2 identities develop: a northern kingdom called Israel, and a southern kingdom called Judah. Israel's destroyed in 722 BCE. Judah survives to 586. The Judeans are the ones who survived the ancient world, hence the name Jewish, hence the word Judaism. Judah is destroyed in 586 by the Babylonians, but is restored under the Persians in 535. When Jews come back in 535 and rejoin the Jews who had never been deported, they put together a Jewish culture, a period in Jewish history generally referred to as the Second Temple, which will last over 600 years, all the way down to the year 70. Significantly during this period, the language shifts from Hebrew to Aramaic, And secondly, you not only have Jews living in the land of Israel, but you have the beginning of a permanent diaspora. So that Jewish history, as it may now be defined, involves a dynamic between a dispersion of Jews all over the place, North Africa, Europe, Middle East, and a Jewish center, which at least from a spiritual point of view is in the land of Israel. It is not until 1948 that an autonomous Jewish state is actually restored there after 18-some centuries without. The Second Temple period is quite complex because the ancient culture of Israel, which is defined in terms of West Asian cultures, Canaanites and others, and to some extent Mesopotamian, and to some extent Egyptian, now has to confront the culture of ancient Greece, which is usually referred to as Hellenistic culture. And in many ways, the intersection of biblical Hebraic culture with Hellenistic culture is the basis of what we might grandly call Western civilization. How Judaism and the culture of Greece, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, Sophocles, and others fit together is an important story. Sometimes they fit together well, and sometimes they don't. We all know, I hope, the story of Hanukkah, which is presented in a certain way for popular consumption, but behind the scenes has much more texture to it. And it wasn't just that the Maccabees were anti-Hellenistic. There were many other elements at play there, because in fact, once the Maccabees come into power and set up their own dynasty called the Hasmoneans, they become Hellenizers, as to those who followed them, particularly Herod, King Herod, who was half Jewish and half from a local people, who was involved in some of the greatest building projects in the history of the land of Israel. The Western Wall, as we have it today, is really part of a Herodian majestic building expedition. Jewish culture becomes complex, it becomes numerous. At the high point in the Roman Empire, probably 10% of the Roman Empire was Jewish. In a world of 55 million people, 5.5 million Jews is a lot greater in a percentage than what we have today with a world of over 6 billion people, in which there are probably less than 14 million Jews. The Jews are not any more than a little bit of dust in the air compared to the total world population. There are all types of different Judaisms by the end of the Second Temple period. When the temple is destroyed in the year 70, and the center of Jewish life in Israel is, from all perspectives, pretty much terminated. Certainly after 135 in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the Jews are dispersed again across the world and carry their traditions with them. It was early in this period that the rabbis emerge and create their interpretation of Judaism, with a belief that not only was there a Torah that had been given in ancient days to Moses, but there was also an authoritative understanding of that Torah, which they called Torah Sheba'al Peh, or the oral Torah. And the oral Torah of the rabbis differentiated them not only from the different Roman and other cultures of the time, but also from Christianity, which grew up initially in the first century within the Jewish community before separating, that had its own oral Torah, so to speak. They did, after debate in the Christian world, hold on to the Hebrew Bible and then added their Bible to it. So they had Old Testament and New Testament, where the Jews only talk about the Hebrew Bible or Tanakh. The rabbis develop a vast system of understanding of Judaism based on their theory of the two Torahs. The first few generations are generally referred to as the Tanaim, and they create a work called the Mishnah, which is codified about the year 200 by Judah the Prince. And then there's an extensive set of commentaries known as Gemara on Mishnah, written mostly in Aramaic, And if you put the Mishnah and the Gemara together, you have the Talmud. And the Talmud becomes the basis of Jewish religious life, and certainly its rabbinic interpretation up to the present. With the rise of Islam in the 7th century of the Common Era, the 600s, the role of the rabbis is greatly strengthened because of its parallel in the caliph, in the caliphate of the Islamic world. From the time that Islam begins to grow, all the way down to 1492, probably the majority of the Jews in the world live in Muslim lands, and a minority live in Christian lands. And then later that's going to reverse. Judaism will interact with both Christianity and Islam, and gain from both, and be challenged by both, intellectually, culturally, even in terms of defense. So, for example, among Muslims, Jews become very adept at philosophy, following certain Aristotelian trends among Muslim scholars, and become great biblical exegetes in Christendom because of the emphasis on scripture there. In both communities, what is called Jewish law, or halakha, will play a very important role in keeping Jewish life regulated in diaspora. For all intents and purposes, in different ways, both in Christian lands and in Islamic lands before the year 1492, the Jews constituted a state within a state, a state within a state. They had their own laws, their own courts, their own calendar, their own dress, their own food, etc. With the expulsion from Spain, with the rise of modernity, the idea of a Jewish state within a state in Europe and the Middle East is challenged, both within and particularly outside of the Jewish community. And the debate became whether or not Jews could be brought into the mainstream of society instead of on the margin. How could that be done? People asked on the outside. And on the inside of the Jewish community, people asked, how can we accept the invitation and yet remain true to our ancestral roots? And that question of how to be both part of the world and to be an exception to dominant societies is the great question of modern Jewish history. And what we're going to look at together is how that plays out, and in different ways it's answered, particularly in Western Europe, which not only will create different models of Jewish life that is diaspora anchored, but will also participate in the idea of a return to Jewish nationhood, that is the Zionist movement and the recreation of the Jewish state. Most significant for what we're doing together in this class will be the outside rejection of a Jewish presence in Western Europe, particularly in the form of Nazism and the racial theories behind it, saying that actually Jews have no place whatsoever, biologically or culturally, within the Western world. So that is the work ahead of us. It is extensive. It is exciting, and I look forward to exploring all this together with you in the weeks to come. Thank you very much.